Recording.
Okay, it's recording.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Welcome to the first brown bag session for 2020 to spotlight EPOL faculty's research. Today we are very, very pleased to have Professor Bill Cope and Professor Mary Kalantzis to present their study for the participants today. And the title of the talk is Artificial Intelligence for Education, Theory and Applications. Professor Cope and Professor Kalantzis are very productive scholars in the field, and also they are leaders in the learning, design, and leadership program. Without further ado, the floor is all yours, professors.
Thank you, David. We certainly live in exciting times, and we want to thank you for arranging this series and giving us a chance to share our research with other faculty, particularly around, what have you done, Bill?
I'm pulling the PowerPoint up to share.
Particularly around a time when these issues about what the nature of education is and is going to be into the future have become vexed for all sorts of contextual reasons. So we are going to share with you our research, the work that we've been doing, and also the kind of practice that we've been testing now for a long time. So we are living in a moment where technology seems to be kind of vacillating between those who are enthusiastic about it and those who are paranoid about it. Now, probably it's been like that always for technology, but it seems to be enhanced these orientations. And in fact, we'd like to say that it's now permeating all our lives. I mean, yesterday I was talking about the need to get a dog, something to put it in the car when we travel. And by the time I got home to my computer, I had these advertisements in my Facebook page. Something had heard me, like some piece of technology had understood that we needed this. So whether we want to or not, if we carry any kind of device with us now, we are involved in the way that data is being gathered about us, both seamlessly and endlessly, whether we're walking in the streets even, or whether we're in our homes. So we want to talk about what artificial intelligence means. So we'll move on, Bill. In two ways. First of all, what is it? What are the mechanics of it? And what's the theory behind the way in which it has evolved as a practice and as a concept? And the second part is to look at the way in AI, the artificial intelligence can be applied, and what's in the message, what's in the medium, right? So they're the two parts of what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to introduce the first part, which is a historical context. And then Bill is going to elaborate our own reflections on where artificial intelligence is going in education. And then the last part is we're going to exemplify what we do in our classes, testing the tools that we have designed as a consequence of both the theory and the availability of the affordances of AI. So first of all, the theory. The first thing we want to say is that, and we'll speak more about this later, what is computability? And for us, we've been exploring for the 3 or 4 years now the idea of transpositions, right? So it's the transposability of meanings into calculable quantity. That's the way in which we're understanding computability and, in fact, artificial intelligence. So we'll come back to that sentence here because it's kind of loaded, but we wanted to put that up first. And we have two dimensions, a broad dimension and a narrow dimension in our definition of what artificial intelligence means. So in the broad definitions, we understand it to be meanings that are made with more calculation than would be feasible without mechanical intelligence, right? And in the narrow definition, we suggest that it's the synergistic human-machine relationship of machine learning. So keep that in mind. We're going to explore both those definitions, both in theory and in practice. So let's start. You've had this field has a long history, a very long history, and we're going to start with Gottfried Leibniz in the 17th to 18th century, when he was looking at the way in which mathematics, he was a philosopher and a mathematician, could influence the way we make meaning and understand meaning. And he had a fantasy, and his fantasy went like that. What if all meanings in the world, right, could be expressed in numbers? Then every truth in the world would be determined mathematically. And he said famously as a consequence, this quote here, then when there are disputes among persons, we can simply say, let's calculate, and without further ado, in order to see who is right. Now, you know, that kind of thinking was way back then a possibility, an imagining. And of course, now it's being used in all sorts of complicated ways. However, if we move forward to the 19th century and to another mathematical genius, Ada Lovelace, she had inherited her love of mathematics from her mother, Anna Isabella Noel Byron, the 11th Baroness of Wentworth. Anna's husband and Ada's father, of course, was Lord Byron. Ada's father, though dismissively, he called his wife the Princess of Parallelograms. You know, women used to be treated like that when they were thinkers, but nonetheless, Ada's work has survived. By the age of 18, Ada Lovelace was introduced to the inventor Charles Babbage, who was one of his high society soirees where he had regularly at his home. And Ada Lovelace attended this with her mother. And on display in the drawing room of Babbage's house was his difference engine, an elaborate mechanical calculator. Ada saw this device here and she was absolutely transfixed. And so she began a long professional association with Babbage, exploring what was possible with these kinds of tools. And their work culminated in 1843 with the publication of Lovelace of a 20,000-word journal article about Babbage's design for a new analytical engine. Of course, Lovelace only signed her paper ALL. She didn't give her name as a woman so that it would be taken seriously. And anyway, let's see what she says. And here are some of her words. And I'm sure you'll agree, for someone writing in 1843, she was remarkably prescient about what the future was going to hold. And she says, by mathematical representation and calculation, it may be possible to express the great facts of the natural world and those unceasing changes of mutual relationships which, visibly or invisibly, consciously or unconsciously, to our immediate physical perceptions, are interminably going to be the agencies of the creations we live amidst. So right then, very early, she understood the significance of the kinds of tools that were being invented. In fact, Lovelace continues, if you go to the next one, Bill, the analytical engine weaves, she says, algebraic patterns just as a jacquard loom weaves flowers and leaves. So she used that as an analogy. In these ways, she says, not only the mental and the material, but the theoretical and the practical in the mathematical world are brought into more intimate and effective connection with each other. The model for such mechanical possibility, Lovelace went on, was the principle which the Jacquard devised for regulating by means of punch cards the most complicated patterns in the fabrication of brocaded stuffs. Well, Lovelace was a truly modern genius, imagining how the qualities of the sensuous world might be transposed into quantities for the purposes of representation and communication. And for that, that's key for us, and you'll hear more about that. Ada Lovelace had imagined how in the future in which we now live, we might be able to build machines which manage the transpositions of quality into quantity. Now, if we move forward, over 100 years later, one of the main founders of modern computing, Alan Turing, turned up Lovelace's largely forgotten article and was able to build on some of its key propositions. You know, after the Second World War, Turing worked at the University of Manchester on one of the world's first computers. And one of the first things Turing and his co-workers did was to use the computer to find some huge prime numbers, which wasn't practical for humans via hand calculations to find. And here we have, on the right, a printout from the computer. And what does Turing note in red there? He gets a surprise, you know, and he says, he's noted there, how did this happen? It's the writing he's got on the teletype, you know, how he wants to understand how the computer arrived at this calculation. And perhaps it was a bug, or perhaps it was a new insight based on so many laborious calculations that no human could feasibly achieve. So for us, to finish that little potted history, machine intelligence is much less than human intelligence, because computers can only calculate, right? But it is much more. Computers can calculate more numbers and faster than humans. So we have cause to be in awe of the superhuman brilliance of their feats in calculation. But I think you'd all agree that we also need to be cautious about what computers cannot do. So to go to our broad definition, the definition which, you know, this history leads to, in the broad definition, artificial intelligence are meanings that are made, as we said before, with more calculation than would be feasible without mechanical intelligence. What's the next one, Bill? Right, and the narrow definition of AI, which we introduced earlier, is that artificial intelligence involves the synergistic human-machine relations of machine learning. Right, so in the narrow definition today, the notion of machine learning is central to artificial intelligence. And in this sense, machine learning means that the humans are training the machine to notice things. These human trainers might be experts, or they might be a mass of users interacting with computers. And fundamentally, there are two types of machine learning. One, of course, is supervised machine learning, and this is where the humans label things and for the machine to count, right? So for an example, when we like something on Facebook, or when we give a high rating in products with Amazon, we are teaching the machine the system and building a system to know us and what we like and who we are. These are just some simple examples of the way in which the environment becomes smarter as a consequence of the way in which we work within it and use it. Now, unsupervised machine learning is when the machine makes calculations that reveal statistical patterns. For example, a cluster of things appear or alternatively, it identifies one or few outliers, whether it's weather patterns or any other phenomenon that the machine can produce results for. So machine learning always involves these synergistic human relationships, whether it's in one direction or the other, whether it's supervised or unsupervised. So with supervised machine learning, the direction is the humans label and the machine counts these labels. With unsupervised machine learning, machine counts and then the humans label what that counting means. The important point here, and we stress, is the synergistic relationship, and no matter how sophisticated the algorithm seems to be, they're relatively crude and simple in relation to the meanings that humans ascribe to their labelings. So what we're going to look at now, and what Bill is going to take up, is how far can we go with calculation? So Bill, over to you.
Okay, so that's the question that I'm going to ask, or try to answer. And in a way, this is the answer. And then I'll try and elaborate on what we mean by that answer. So the limits of artificial intelligence are the limits of the transposability of meanings into quantity. Now, just by way of a reference, Mary and I have spent the last 4 years actually working on, it was meant to be one book and then it got too big, and Cambridge University Press said we had to split into two. So these are books where we kind of think theoretically and philosophically, and also, as you can hear from the way Mary was speaking, we think historically. We're interested in the history of ideas and where these things came from, essentially. So anyhow, these are the two books. The first one looks at what we call reference agency and structure, which are things intrinsic to meanings in the world. And then the second one looks at stuff that sits around meanings, hence adding sense. You know, how does context also shape meaning, and how does interest as a set of underlying purposes, if you like, in the world affect that?
Now, you might see that it's called inner grammar of multimodal meaning. I mean, we started off wanting to understand multimodal meaning, but we think also we've provided a grammar to understand what happens in the digital space as well, because certainly we need to have the meta language to deal with the components of meaning making that the digital has evolved and provides us.
So we want to talk about the peculiar meaning activities that happen in this digital world. And what we've identified is 4 moments of transposition where a meaning becomes a number and then it becomes a meaning again. And the first thing is something that we call nameability. So here we are, there's a bag tag on the side and it names that bag. And on the right here, we have a number which names that, that product. So we live in a world where things are named in very precise ways. So in our grammar, we call these things instances. And by the way, the instance is the individual sardine can. The concept is this particular product, to be quite frank. So what we're doing is we're doing something which in language, which would normally be called a proper noun, right, which is Mary and Bill, as opposed to a common noun, which is we're both, you know, we're each people, right? So what we're doing is we're doing this business of instantiation, which is naming things with incredible precision, both at the level of unique instances of things, but also at the conceptual level. So in other words, this thing on the left is a bag, this thing on the right is a sardine can in general, right? And we built this elaborate system of naming, which is actually far more elaborated and grounded and universal, to be quite frank, than what's ever possible in natural language. So in other words, what we've got now is we've got this naming process, which always goes through the digitization down to, you know, zeros and ones, and then back out again when it gets named in a particular way. But one of the things we want to argue is, in fact, the meaning of these things is not just in the name, it's in the fact that the labels are attached to a bag and a sardine can. The meaning is in the can, in the sardines, the meaning is in the bag, and these various intermediaries are going on in the world. Now, of course, you can imagine how important this is now in terms of this phenomenon called the Internet of Things. But what's very interesting is the universal stabilization of these things. There can only be one brand of sardine that has this particular number on it. It's possible to identify things in terms of their meaning with a great deal of precision. The second thing that happens in these spaces, so what we're trying to do basically is talk about what are the fundamental dimensions of transposition that are going on, because these become the limits of calculability. Right, so calculability is that we can count these darn things. So in other words, we can count the sardine cans, we can count the bags, we can, so we can name them, define them, and then we can count them. Now, the great genius in this place, Alan Turing is hugely lauded, but in fact, the fundamental genius was Claude Shannon. And by the way, this is the book on the right, published by the University of Illinois Press, a little bit of interesting trivial thing called The Mathematical Theory of Communication. But this is from Claude Shannon's 1938 article, where he makes one kind of lump of genius stroke by again recovering another obscure 19th century person who was George Boole, the philosopher. And what he said was, look, we can actually reduce, we can mechanically deal with calculable things in a highly granular way by reducing things to the on and off of electrical circuits. But the crucial thing that he does is that he also says we can actually build certain logics, which are now called Boolean logic. So in a way, this is this amazing insight of Claude Shannon, who was a crazy eccentric person who was both a juggler and a unicycle rider. You need to know that. But so, and by the way, these are all stories that we tell at much greater length in the 2 volumes that we just mentioned. The third thing we can do is we can measure things. So things occur across scales. Again, Leibniz was one of the great discoverers of this idea with the calculus, as was, there's a debate about whether the calculus was found by Leibniz or Newton, but in fact, it's the Leibnizian version which we've ended up using. That's but the fact that things occur across scales in measurable ways is kind of interesting, it's quantifiable. So we have temperatures and we have a whole lot of stuff which are measurable across infinite points across scales. So we use number for measurement. And the fourth thing we use number for, it's not wanting to go on there. Yeah, we go. These are examples of imminent, measurements in the world. We've got all these measurements on our bodies now, which tell us how many steps we've got and relate to time. So all these sort of ambient calculations are going on around us are kind of interesting, including when we walk in the door. So we've got all these forms of calculation happening, which are imminently calculating the relations with things in the world in a way which is representable to us. And the fourth big thing that quantification does in the realm of meaning is what we call renderability. So, this is the process of pixelation, which is in fact just counting on and off, black and white. Or in the case of color, it's counting the 16 million colors that can, the eye can only see 2 million colors. So we've got 16 million possible colors in these RGB configurations. And the answer of the color of a picture is all these darn megapixels. It's just boringly, a line of this number and a line of, number cell by cell. It does these things. Now, what's interesting about this world is what we've managed to do, apropos multimodality, is all the historical modes or media, tangible physical media we've used to mean with, which includes image, it includes the sound of our voices, and includes now even objects, which can be, by a computer-aided design, we can conceive a building that way, or we can build something in 3D printing. So objects in space and writing and speech and music and everything can all go through these processes of, scan the object in some way or another, render it in this digital form, which by the way is writing, but completely inscrutable by the time it's noughts and ones, and then remanufacture that for the purposes of media. So getting back to our definitions, in terms of the narrow AI, what we can do with, I'm just going to press this. Okay. Is that we can, well, Mary's already mentioned these things, to be quite frank. This is the environment in which we can add these machine learning processes on top of things, And so, for example, when by machine learning, your Facebook page knows that the picture you've got is of a landscape. It's not because it's possible by calculation ever to know what a landscape is. It's because a zillion people have said this is a landscape, and the machines realize that when there's a certain amount of blue up the top and something over here that's like a tree, it's been, which is this combination of colors across the array, which is the visual array of a digital image, that the machine has learnt from the users that this is a landscape, right? So this is the kind of, but it's this transposition from meaning to calculation back to meaning, which has then been labeled, that the machine learns from. So part two now that we're going to get onto, and is this the point where do I keep on going, or I swap over to you?
We do this part together.
Okay, is this back to you?
Yes, so I'll just start it.
Okay.
Right, so we're going to, remember I said the third part, I think it said the second part, but the third part. We're going to look at how we apply it in education. So we'll give you the example of our own inventions and developments. And we're going to start with, the broad definition of artificial intelligence and how we interpret it. And it's about the ability to see learning in a way that we couldn't see it before, in the way that learners can self-see, they can see their own learning, and instructors are able to see the effectiveness of their learning even in ways that they couldn't do that before. So that's in the broad definition of artificial intelligence. The technology affords us that kind of seeing.
Oh, and by the way, can I just jump in with something? Earlier on in the PowerPoint, we put inverted commas around mechanical intelligence. That's Alan Turing's idea, which is, that's quoting Alan Turing. So what we're talking about here is Alan Turing's version of mechanical intelligence, essentially. Right. So conventionally these days, people talk about artificial intelligence as machine learning, the narrow definition, and we're going to get to that. So we're talking about the broad Alan Turing version first.
Okay.
Oops, sorry. Yeah. Okay.
So I think over 20 years now, Bill and I have been applying for grants to explore the affordances of technology for teaching and learning and for making meaning in the world and disseminating meaning around the world. And we're going to show you just go back a minute.
Oh, I don't know. It's your mouse. You go back.
It doesn't matter now. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We're going to show you into a platform that we've developed. Why? We are not developers of tools, but as educators, we develop the tools of our trade. So we believe that we need to collaborate with others to explore the way in which the digital can produce our values as educators. I mean, the first generation of tools were not necessarily invented by us, although educators were used, whether it was Compass or Moodle, or they were provided for a very traditional way of uploading, downloading a test at the end. But we know the limitations of those kinds of tools for learning and for rich engagement. So our research agenda is, how do we push, we have 7 affordances that we talk about, the affordances of the digital. How do you push those affordances in order to create the digital environment as a richer learning environment, in fact, maybe even richer than face-to-face, though we're not saying, in our pedagogical argument, we talk about repertoires. There's no single solution to pedagogy. But anyway, we're going to show you the way in which we've tried to harness the affordances of the digital to create a richer learning environment than is possible with some of the tools that are available at the moment. So this is just an example of classroom discourse. Can you just move those pictures away, Bill? Sorry, put them down or up or whatever. So what you have here in this area, and you can see I've circled community. So there's a number of spaces in the Scholar platform that we've created, but in the space called community, which could be a classroom or a lecture group or any kind of community of learners, we have what we call social knowledge being created in the way in which social media creates it. So you have here an activity stream, which, unlike a regular classroom where teacher lectures like we're lecturing and then one person puts their hand up or we ask somebody to speak. In this environment, in this community, every single learner in the space, in this community, can engage in the conversation through this activity screen, this knowledge producing screen. And as we're going to say, all of it can be tagged and the data collected from it. But what we want is to create a rich environment of engagement, not just the teacher on the stage and the learners engaging in their heads or in minimal ways. So how do we do it? Here's another example, also in the community space. Of course, the term used is a flipped classroom. The instructor inputs are in videos and readings and activities which are pushed out to learners. And then the discussion happens in that community space. And as I said earlier, it's not just one person talking, it's all the students talking and talking to each other. So it's not just a conversation with the teacher around the content, it's also a conversation with each other. And again, because it's happening in a digital space, the potential for the mathematical affordance and for measuring and calculating and rendering that result is made possible for us. But this is just two examples of the way in which this platform operates. Now, the other thing that we've put in here is the world is multimodal. And I can't go into this in any depth, but more impactful meaning seems to happen nowadays through the visual than even through alphabetical literacy in the most authoritative of text. So we have created a space where creators, the learners, produce in multimodal ways, right? That their text is not just alphabetical literacy, they need to learn how it's meaningful to integrate sources, to understand the validity, credibility, etc. So that's one piece of the design. But on the right-hand side, you can see here, the whole pedagogy relies on peer-to-peer feedback. And we have built in the rubric that enables the student to design whatever the work is that they're required to design. And the rubric also helps their peers to evaluate it. So there's a community of practice which evolves, and the students then get to self-review and also to respond to their reviewers. So you've got this constant flow backwards and forwards between the creative and the peer feedback. And Bill has a diagram here that he's going to explain how it works.
Okay, so and this is moving on to the question about the AI aspects of this. So this just gives you an example of what happens not in the discussion area, but in the peer review process. This is the kind of process that goes on. We've built this underlying platform just because you simply can't do this in Google Docs. There's no versioning in it. So we need to keep the first version. We need to keep the reviews against those. And what we end up with is a phenomenal amount of data, different versions which can be compared, huge, lots of review text, lots of ratings of those texts, and so on. And what we end up with is this learning analytics area, and I blurred myself out, but in fact that's me there. This is my class view. And this, by the way, we have to give enormous credit to Duane Searsmith, who's been with us in the college now for about 10 years, and we've had him working on a number of projects. So this is his genius as a software person. He used to work at NCSA, and now we're lucky to have him working with us. So the Alan Turing narrow version of, broad version of artificial intelligence is, this is an 8-week class with 30 or 40 people in it. And we're measuring for 20, 30 different things, which are all proxies for, calculated proxies for other things. So this one, this is a screen grab, unfortunately, but if it was live, I could mouse over each of these. And what we're doing in a very transparent way is explaining to the students exactly what every measure is. So one of the measures in this knowledge sector is over here is peer review judgments. So in other words, we've got people making these qualitative judgments against criteria, which then become, if you like, crowdsourced qualitative judgments, which have been quantified. So we've got all these different measures going on. And by the way, there's a sector which is definable as knowledge, a sector which we categorize as focus, which is the amount of work you've done essentially, otherwise known as grit or perseverance. In pedagogical theory, there are lots of words for this. And then help is a collaboration measure, which was, we want to build a collaboration culture. So you get reviews on your reviews, ratings of your reviews. Exactly, that's, the internet's full of this. The internet's driven by these kinds. And the word we use, by the way, well, reflexive pedagogy is one phrase we use, but also recursive feedback is what we use to describe this is a mode of assessment.
Right. Now, this is a very simple image, but however, it's really at the heart of our pedagogy and our values, because in the online environment, there is anxiety about the kind of engagement that people have in that space, what it means to collaborate or not collaborate. But what we've done via this form, and you can change the pedals, you can make them any way, you can even change the 3 segments. But for us, we weight them equally because we value the collaborative social knowledge that occurs. We don't have a bell curve, where we spread students across, a range. We allow every student to meet their potential. We allow every student to get the grade that they want to get, because they see this. We see this as an instructor, and they see it as they progress. So the knowledge part builds up, so we know whether they're learning the content and the concepts, but we also know the degree to which they're engaged, in the learning process and the requirements.
Or slipping behind and needing help.
Or slipping behind, yes, because we can see all of that. But the third part is help. And I have to tell you, students find that a bit hard because they're used to working on their own. They have this idea of cheating or, whatever. But for us, we want them to cite each other. We want them to help each other succeed. Because we don't have this bell curve and some are good and some are bad, the idea is that we help each other get to the best outcome that we want. So the help part gets weighted in the grade equally to the knowledge part and equally to the focus part. Now, we believe that in the online environment, these kind of assessment tools, which deliver information as you go, not at the end when it's too late, are absolutely vital. And it's what the artificial intelligence in this broader sense allows us to do. It allows us to code and calculate and collect data in a way that we could never do it before. Now, we also have experts that we use to rate the peer review ratings, right? And we have found from the research that we've done that in fact the peer-to-peer reviewers come up with the same, on average, yeah, comparable outcomes as the expert reviewers. So we as instructors can cope with large numbers of students and still produce very high quality outcomes because it's the community working together to produce these outcomes. And there are iteration after iteration after iteration. We couldn't have done it in a face-to-face environment, but in this environment, we can get extraordinary outcomes as instructors with very large, the scale issue doesn't matter in this kind of environment. And this particular affordance of the artificial intelligence, the broad sense of it, enables us to assess and evaluate in meaningful ways as the work is progressing, when it's meaningful to the student, rather at the end when we just say you got an A, a B, a C, or a D, when it's too late for the student to adjust what they're doing.
So let me tell you the Alan Turing conclusions, which is more calculation than a human could do, mechanical intelligence. See down there, there's 14,500 pieces of actionable feedback. That's a comment from one peer to another, or our intervention in something. These are all a bit of machine feedback. And at the end of an 8-week course with, I think there were 40 or so students in this course, we've got 3.3 million data points, which is little actions that have happened in that space. Text that's been written, multiple versions of every work that's peer reviewed, a huge amount of conversation going on. And we could never deal with that amount of calculation. We could never do this. So this provides us support, which is beyond incomprehensible in the very, very simple, broad sense of more calculation than we could reasonably do without these tools.
Before you move on, for those of you out there who are faculty or administrators, if we are to make the most of the digital environment and we're learning, the way in which we produce syllabi, content, learning experience has to change. It can't be a single professor working on their own. We have to move to a team culture where faculty work together, where they work together with technology people, where they work together with instructional designers. We need to invest in teams. We need to think of the production and delivery in the term of teams. And also in the delivery, we couldn't operate without TAs, without the teaching assistants. Now, you could say that always, but the kind of work involved in the constant engagement with learners is more intense than in a face-to-face classroom where you walk away and just have office hours. You know, it's continuous. So the model and the infrastructure for higher education or any kind of education, if we are to be successful in this space, needs a rethinking of who's involved in the design and the delivery.
Now, we're moving on to the narrow definition, which is actually our final point in our argument. Learning from learners by detecting and offering feedback on higher order thinking. This is a very, very ambitious project that we've had jointly with folks in computer science in an NSF project that we've just completed. So here's a piece of text. This is one tiny example of an annotation. So see here on the left, there's a sentence which has been highlighted, and the person has put EVEI minus in there. So we have 20 codes that we've given our students which align with the peer review rubric, where they're to find specific examples of a particular quality we're looking for. So EVEI plus is evidence, a strong example of evidence. EVEI minus is where more evidence is needed to sustain the claim. Right? So we've got 20 of these, that's 2 EVEI plus and minuses. So we have 20 of these codes. Now, in fact, across, we now have 20,000 of these codes that have been created. And what we've been working with Duane and Searsmith to do is to see whether the machine is able to find these higher order things. Now, right. How could the machine find them? Well, sentences which are similar because there's some indicator in the sentence that something is there or something is missing. This is exactly what all the machine learning stuff does. And there's also this name of deep learning, which is kind of machine learning is calculation and deep learning is calculation on calculation, if you want me to be a bit kind of simplistic about what these things are. So we've had this experiment where we've shown some interesting, these are very high order things.
And this is in medicine?
No, this is in education. And I'm going to show you, we've been doing it in medicine as well. I'm going to show you the medicine example next. So that's us.
It's a bit more complicated in education, whereas disciplines like medicine have more, standardized ontologies.
So one of the things about education is that evidence is a very, very high level concept, is a claim supported by evidence. Whereas we're now doing this work in medicine, and this is another wonderful piece of work that a tool that Duane Searsmith has built. So on the left, we have a diabetes study written by a medicine student here at the U of I. And what we've got over here on the right now, the student didn't do this. This is us building an experimental model. Because medicine's a much more semantically stabilized domain, it's actually stabilized semantically for the worst reasons in the world primarily, which is otherwise known as insurance coding. But in fact, there are a number of what's called ontologies, which is nicely both the philosophical concept and the computer concept, and the two align in interesting ways, in ways that we explore in the book. We are asking the student to highlight bits of their text and align them with medical ontologies, which are schemas which describe the whole domain. Each of these schemas here on the right, for example, I can see SNOMED, which is a surgical one. There's the biggest ones, international whatever for diseases. I'm trying to think of what it stands for now, which in fact was begun by Florence Nightingale. So these often have deep historical roots. They're not just digital ontologies, they're domain descriptions. So what we're hoping to do in terms of clinical reasoning is get by the students annotating their text against ontologies, we might be able to give subsequent students suggestions based on the training of the system that the student has already given. Right. So that's another example of an experiment we're doing in the whole AI area in the narrow definition of machine learning.
And ironically, we're working in the medical area and in the both human medicine and animal medicine, because unlike education, for some unfathomable reason, medicine is moving faster into using digital technology for, personalized medicine. We could talk about personalized learning, for surgery. We could talk about, instruction, for instruction itself. I mean, they are moving much faster, and they need to adjust their pedagogy in order to prepare learners who can do these clinical reasoning, higher order thinking on the fly, and particularly in collaboration with others. So for us, it's been interesting to be in that field that is both more rigid because of those rigid ontologies and more open because of the aspirations that they have.
Join us in one of these places. If you don't have a Scholar account, create it. And we have effectively a blog called New Learning. We're also on Twitter and Facebook as well. So come and join us, because we're all the time speaking out loud about what we're doing. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and that'll give us a chance to maybe, we haven't been looking at the chat. We have the screen full of whatever. Oh my goodness, lots of stuff there. So David, over to you for some questions, and maybe you might have seen some questions in there which we haven't been able to see because we were talking.
Thank you, Bill and Mary, for this wonderful presentation. And we have a couple minutes to do some Q&A. And feel free to use the mic, or you can use the chat box. And
we'll talk. We're surprised we left a couple of minutes, David.
Sorry about that, folks.
Are there any questions that you see there, David, that are meaningful? Because we haven't been looking at the chat box.
A lot of comments actually are sharing with the audience in terms of how wonderful it is to see the learning progress within the Scholar system. And I have not seen questions per se, but those are compliments about the visual in particular that you just shared.
Let me say, and this is for our students as well, I mean, Mary and I consider ourselves incredibly fortunate to have been here at U of I, where we've been able to get the grants to do these things, to be quite frank. So it's been a great opportunity for us.
And the colleagues across the campus.
Yeah,
I mean,
amazing.
We're working with people in computer science and engineering, and our visiting scholars have been absolutely critical. We have we did have a stream of visiting scholars who came, who were interested because their countries are dealing with the same issues, and they've been part of our team. We have a weekly, a bi-weekly research team where we discuss these issues and look for grants to continue the work.
Oh, and try to process this data. I mean, what we've got is we've got an environment which generates monumental amounts of data. So to give you a sense, the size of our data set now of our masters and doctoral students, we have more than 30 million words of text.
Right.
We have the annotations. Look, last time we counted, it was over 20,000, but it's probably a lot more now. So we're building this enormous data set. And one of the things about the whole AI universe, you need big data sets to be able to achieve anything, essentially.
And we would love collaborators, we would love partners, we would love feedback. I mean, you know, all of us.
And look, by the way, the U of I owns us and this. And if anybody wants to use it, you're very welcome. It's completely different from Moodle.
For K to 12, Lindsay, it is very, very, I mean, we've used, whatever we've shown you here, we have tested and trialed in classroom context, even in elementary school.
Down to grade 4.
Down to grade 4. We can't do it below that, but and the kids are ducks to water, right? Ducks to water. They really love to talk to each other. They love to construct.
I love the analytics, the Astaplot. They love the, you know, this is the age of Fitbits and likes and the, what do they call it? The calculated self, the quantified self.
But the Astaplot is really the most significant thing that we've been able to develop in a way, because it is, you know, we believe that if you can crack assessment you can fix pedagogy or improve pedagogy. You know, the high stakes testing at the end is a barrier to innovation. It's a barrier to everything. So that was our goal from the beginning. How do you create something that provides feedback that can also be scored, right, as you go, right? You know, you could aggregate and give an A or B or C. You could aggregate and give a number, but not be burdened with that terrible, those high stakes end of the year. How do we make it with rigor? How do we make it with, give it legitimacy? And that's one of the things that we're testing now and is more important to us than everything, because it's been a roadblock in K-12 and in higher ed, the test. You know, the test is a roadblock to curriculum innovation, no matter what we say and what we teach.
And by the way, you know, one of our, we have a little provocative slogan, which is the test is dead, long live assessment. So you can run a critique of traditional assessments for a whole lot of reasons. We know the critique, we lived the critique since we were children. So the argument is this is an environment whereby analysing and giving constant recursive feedback on everything and collecting a record of that feedback, everything's formative. Summative is only a retrospective view of progress and the way in which progress occurs. And therefore we abolish, well, let's say, I'm going to be even more revolutionary. We abolish the distinction between assessment and instruction, and we abolish the distinction of formative and summative assessment. So that's our big kind of, you know, at that point people start feeling a little bit unnerved. But when we're feeling a little bit utopian about it, that's what we say we're trying to do.
And the other thing, just to finish, David, which you'll appreciate, is the way in which, in higher ed anyway, we organise our labour, right? And we talk about collaboration, but we don't have the infrastructure for that to be realised, or the time or the expectation. And we cannot move into this space unless we take up just whatever the world is out there and try to massage it to work for us. We as educators need to be the inventors of these tools. And David, I think you appreciate that because you're working in this field too, but we don't have the infrastructure and the policies that will enable us to bring this to fruition in the way that the engineers do. They have labs with collaborators, and you know, as we work too much on our own, unfortunately, because that's how the system operates in our fields.
Okay, so thank you everyone for those nice comments. I've had a chance to speed read them a bit while Mary was talking. So yeah.
David, do you have any final question yourself?
I don't have any question per se, but I really appreciate the connections your presentation is able to make to enable, I think, myself included, participants today to see the forest and just not looking at one or two single trees, but the big picture and the foundation that sustain that forest to grow further. That would be my thinking at this point.
Well, thank you, David. This is the first real opportunity we've had to share these ideas, so we appreciate it, and we appreciate that you're creating now in the COVID period an opportunity for more of us to discuss these things, student and faculty and administrators together. So thank you, David.
Thank you again, Professor Cole, Professor Kalantzis, and thank you for everybody participating today. We will share the recording hopefully soon, and we are looking forward to seeing you in our next session.
Right.
So we all need to do the Zoom wave. I have a theory on Zoom wave.
Yes, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye everyone.
Thank
See you
you.
then.